The cabin and the price. Daniel never thought his life would change over something so small and strange as a forgotten auction in a dusty old town on the edge of nowhere. The hall was almost empty that day, filled only with the echo of the auctioneer's voice and the smell of rusted chairs and stale air. Most people had left hours ago when all the valuable items had already been taken. But Daniel stayed because he had nothing better to do, and because sometimes in places like this there were odd treasures left behind that no one cared about. He had only a few coins in his pocket, not enough to buy anything important, but enough to feel that maybe he could walk away with something that carried a story. The auctioneer's voice cracked as he read the next item, a cabin deed, old and yellowed paper that looked like it might crumble in his hands. It was listed at 12 cents, a price so ridiculous that even the 3 people still in the room laughed. The auctioneer shrugged and asked if anyone would take it. No one raised their hand until Daniel, almost without thinking, lifted his own. Maybe it was because he was tired of feeling invisible, or maybe it was because 12 cents meant nothing to him, but losing it felt less than the thought of walking out empty-handed. The gavel fell, and with that dull wooden sound, he became the owner of a cabin no one wanted. The deed gave only a rough location in the forest that stretched for miles outside the town. Daniel walked most of the way because his old truck had broken down weeks before. By the time he reached the place, the sun was sinking behind tall pines and shadows were stretching long and heavy across the ground. He expected to find a rotted shack leaning on broken beams, but what he saw instead made him stop. The cabin stood firm, its wood darkened by age but intact, the windows unbroken, the roof solid, as if it had been built by hands that cared deeply. It was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that pressed on the ears until you began to hear your own heartbeat. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, dust floated like slow-moving stars in the shafts of evening light, but something felt wrong. The air was heavy and cold, carrying a faint hum like distant machinery. His eyes scanned the walls, and he saw deep scratches across the wood, long claw-like marks that had no place in an abandoned cabin. A smell lingered, metallic and sharp, not the smell of rot, but of something strange and alien. Daniel felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. He stepped further in, each board groaning under his weight. The silence grew heavier. Then he noticed it, an odd glow seeping from the back room, faint but steady, like moonlight trapped in a jar. He moved toward it slowly, each step heavier than the last, his mind whispering that he should turn back, but his body carried him forward as though pulled by invisible threads. The glow leaked out through the cracks of a half-closed door. Daniel swallowed, pushed the door open, and froze. The room was large and dark except for the light that poured from the center. Hanging there, suspended by strange glowing restraints that seemed to float in the air, was something that shook him to his core. At first he thought it was a statue or some cruel art, but then he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. It was a girl, or at least something shaped like one. She was enormous, her head nearly brushing the beams of the ceiling even though she hung limp. Her skin shimmered faintly with silver-blue light, her hair long and tangled, her body bound in ways that made no sense to human eyes. She looked both fragile and terrifying, like a goddess trapped in chains of light. Daniel's breath caught. His mind raced, trying to understand, but nothing in his world explained what he saw. She was alive, breathing slowly, and whoever had put her here had used something far beyond human technology. His heart pounded louder with each second, and he realized he was not standing in some forgotten cabin, but in a place where something impossible had been hidden. The cabin he bought for 12 cents had become the doorway to a secret that no one else had dared to claim. And as Daniel stared, unable to move, the alien girl stirred slightly in her glowing prison, and the silence of the cabin turned into something heavy with warning, as if the entire forest held its breath. The discovery of the alien. Girl Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, unable to take his eyes away from the figure suspended before him. The glow of the restraint shimmered like liquid light, wrapping around her wrists, ankles, and waist in bands that pulsed faintly as though alive. He had never seen anything like it, and part of his mind screamed that he was not supposed to be here, that he should turn and run back into the forest, but another part held him still, whispering that if he left now he would regret it for the rest of his life. The alien girl hung there in silence, her breathing faint and shallow but steady, her face slack in some strange sleep. Daniel stepped closer, his boots pressing against the wooden floor until it creaked. Up close she looked even larger than he first thought, Towering and broad, her limbs long and powerful, yet her expression was almost peaceful. Her skin glowed faintly in places as if stars themselves were embedded beneath the surface. Her hair, though tangled and dirty, carried a sheen that caught the glow of the restraints and made it shimmer with hidden colors. Daniel felt small, like a child staring at a giant carved from light and shadow. He reached out a hand and then pulled it back, unsure if touching her would harm him or wake something he could not handle. His eyes scanned the glowing bonds. They did not look like chains or ropes, but strands of pure energy, humming softly like a song beneath the air. He leaned closer and saw faint symbols carved into the air itself, runes or letters that shifted when he tried to focus on them. It was not human technology, he was sure of that, nor anything he had ever read about in books or stories. Whoever had done this possessed knowledge far beyond Earth. A sudden thought struck him. If she was here, then someone had put her here. Someone who had technology to cross the stars and hide her on Earth. Why this cabin? Why sell it for 12 cents? And why was she left alive instead of killed? Questions rolled in his mind until he pressed his hand against his temple to silence them, but the sight before him refused to let go. He could not stop thinking that this girl was both prisoner and secret, and now, by sheer chance, she had become his responsibility. The silence in the cabin thickened, broken only by the faint hum of the restraints and the steady thud of his own heart. Daniel forced himself to move closer. His hand reached out again, this time brushing the faint glow of the bonds. The light rippled under his touch like water disturbed by a stone. The humming grew louder for a moment and he pulled back quickly. But the alien girl stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering as though she sensed him. Daniel froze once more, waiting, hardly daring to breathe. After a long moment, her head tilted slightly, lips parting as if she was whispering in a dream, though no sound came out. Fear and curiosity battled inside him. He had stumbled into something that no human was prepared for, yet something inside urged him not to run. He felt a pull toward her, a connection that made no sense but felt undeniable. His eyes wandered to the strange bruises and marks across her arms, proof that she had fought against these restraints until exhaustion claimed her. Whoever had done this wanted her subdued but alive, and that thought filled Daniel with unease. He stepped back, pacing the room, trying to think. He knew he should leave, tell someone, call the authorities, maybe even the military, but then he pictured men in uniform swarming this cabin, taking her away, experimenting, destroying whatever fragile life still lingered in her. Something deep inside told him that if he called anyone, it would be the end of her, and though he had no reason to care, he realized he could not allow that. Daniel looked back at her, her body still limp in the glow, her face almost serene despite the cruel bindings. He whispered softly, not even sure why. "Who are you and why are you here?" His voice echoed back at him, the words sounding strange in the heavy air. He took another step closer, his hand once more brushing the bonds. This time he pressed harder, and to his shock the glow flickered faintly as if his touch weakened them. A chill ran down his spine. He pulled back quickly, but the discovery burned in his mind. If he wanted, he could break her free. The thought terrified him, yet at the same time it filled him with something else. Responsibility, a sense that maybe fate itself had placed him here. As he stood there staring, the alien girl shifted again, her body swaying slightly in the restraints, and her eyes almost opened before sinking shut once more. Daniel's breath caught. She was alive, struggling beneath whatever prison held her, and she might awaken at any moment. The cabin seemed to tremble with the weight of the secret it carried, and Daniel realized that by walking into this room he had stepped across a line from which there was no return. Awakening in the first words, Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat on a chair he had dragged into the room and kept his eyes fixed on the alien girl, as if turning away for even a moment might cause her to vanish or transform into something unrecognizable. The cabin groaned against the wind outside, but inside the only sounds were the hum of the glowing restraints and the rhythm of her slow breaths. Every so often she stirred as though trapped in a nightmare, her lips moving without sound and her body tensing before falling still again. Daniel felt like a guard standing watch over, a prisoner who was not truly his prisoner, but whose fate had somehow become tied to his own. As hours passed, he felt the weight of the choice before him pressing harder and harder. He could leave her as she was, suspended in that strange prison, until whoever had put her here returned, or he could try to free her and risk whatever might follow. He thought of the auctioneer's careless voice when the cabin was sold, of the laugh that followed the price of 12 cents. Whoever arranged this had not wanted attention. They wanted her forgotten. And now Daniel was the one person in the world who knew the truth. His hand brushed the restraints again, and once more they rippled like disturbed water. He swallowed hard, steadied his nerves, and pressed both palms against the glowing bands. Heat spread into his skin, and his arms trembled as though he was pushing against invisible weight. The light flickered and cracked, sparks scattering through the air. A sharp sound filled the room, and then the band around her waist snapped like shattered glass dissolving into nothing. Daniel staggered back, his heart pounding, waiting for something terrible to happen. The alien girl's body sagged, still held by the bonds at her wrists and ankles. He hesitated only a moment before reaching for the others. One by one, he pressed his hands against them until each burst in a shower of fading sparks. Finally, the last restraint dissolved and her massive body fell forward. The floor shook as she landed, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Daniel rushed forward, his small frame barely able to support her, and managed to keep her head from striking the boards. She was heavy beyond belief, yet he eased her down until she lay across the floor. For a moment he thought she would remain unconscious, but then her eyelids fluttered. Slowly they opened, and Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. Her eyes glowed with a light that was not human. Deep pools of violet with faint rings of silver that seemed to move like liquid stars. They focused on him, and for a heartbeat he forgot how to breathe. She blinked slowly, her lips parting, and when she spoke the words were broken, strange, but unmistakably meant for him. Small. Warrior, she whispered, her voice rough like someone who had not spoken in years. Daniel felt a chill run through him. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He expected anger or confusion, but instead her eyes softened, and she reached out a hand larger than his head. Her fingers brushed the floor beside him as though even lifting them was a burden too heavy. He found his voice at last. "You're alive," he said, the words simple and almost foolish in the silence of the cabin. Her lips curved faintly, though it was not quite a smile. "Alive? Because you touched the chains," she murmured, her accent thick but her meaning clear. Daniel sat back, staring, his mind racing with questions but unable to form them. She watched him with eyes that seemed to pierce through every thought and fear. Then she closed them again, her body trembling as if the effort of speaking had drained her. Still her hand shifted, curling slightly toward him as though seeking the presence that had freed her. For the first time, Daniel realized the danger of what he had done. Whatever she was no ordinary creature. Her words carried weight. Her presence filled the room like a storm building on the horizon. He had cut her loose from a prison designed by something far beyond human knowledge, and now she was awake in his world. He felt both terrified and strangely protective, as if the fragile thread of connection formed between them could not be broken. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows. Daniel sat beside her, torn between fear and awe, knowing the cabin was no longer just his, and that the girl he had found was going to change everything. The story. She tells. When the morning. Light slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls. Daniel found himself still sitting near the alien girl who now lay stretched across the floor, her breathing deep and steady, as if sleep had finally given her some peace. He had not moved for hours, too afraid that if he left even for a moment she might vanish or that the cabin itself would collapse around them. The silence of the forest outside felt unnatural, as though every creature had gone still to listen to what would happen next. Last her eyes opened again, glowing faintly in the light of dawn. She turned her head slowly as if the effort was painful, but her gaze locked on him with a strange focus. He expected confusion or hostility, but instead she spoke in her rough, broken voice, again clearer than before. "You freed me," she said, her words heavy but steady. Daniel nodded, unable to answer right away. She watched him, waiting with patience that felt almost ancient. Then she pushed herself up, her massive form moving with difficulty until she leaned against the wall. Her presence filled the entire room, her head brushing the beams above and her shoulders broad enough to make the space feel smaller. "Why were you here?" Daniel finally asked, his voice low but urgent. Who put you in this place? Her eyes closed briefly as though memories pressed too heavily against her. She drew in a slow breath before answering. Hunters, she said. They follow my kind across stars. They capture us, sell us, break us, until we are nothing. Her voice trembled, but she did not falter. I was betrayed, one of my own made a bargain, and I was taken bound and brought here hidden away on this world. Daniel stared in disbelief. The words sounded impossible, but the glow in her eyes and the scars across her body told him it was truth. He had heard stories of alien life whispered in late-night radio shows, or buried in the corners of strange books, but never had he thought it would stand before him so real and broken. Why, Earth? He asked, his voice sharper. Why bring you here of all places? She looked at him with those violet eyes that seemed older than any age he could imagine. Because humans are forgotten by the stars. She said, Your world is seen as wild, untamed, too dangerous for most. My captors thought no one would search for me here. They thought I would die unseen. Her words stung like a blade against Daniel's chest. Forgotten by the stars. He wanted to protest, but deep down he knew. Earth had always been considered small and weak in any dream of the galaxy. Yet something in her tone carried more than pity. It carried warning. They call your people Deathworlders, she continued. Whispered legends told in places of power and fear. They believe you savage and unpredictable. They do not come here unless forced, and that is why they chose this place for me to vanish. Daniel's breath caught at her words. The way she spoke of humanity as legend, both feared and dismissed, unsettled him. He leaned closer, his voice quiet but firm. And what about you? What are you? Her lips pressed together, and for a moment she did not answer. Then slowly she said, I am from the Karaith. My people are tall, strong, our voices carry. Across battlefields we were meant to protect, not to be hunted. I am not queen, not noble, only soldier left behind. She looked down at her hands, massive and trembling. I should have died in chains, but you, small warrior, you touched the light and broke it. Daniel felt a shiver as she said those words. Again she called him small warrior, and though it sounded strange, there was no mockery in it. Only respect. She seemed to see something in him that he did not see in himself. They sat in silence for a while. The weight of her story sinking into him, Daniel could no longer think of the cabin as just an abandoned place bought for 12 cents. It had become the center of a secret stretching across the stars. He had freed someone who carried the scars of battles fought far beyond Earth, and with that choice he had stepped into a path he could never turn away from. Her voice came again, softer now, but filled with steel. They will come for me, she said. They will not allow me to stay free. And when they come, they will see you and know that humanity still stands. Daniel clenched his fists. His world had been small, the edges of a forgotten town, the silence of a broken truck, and now it had widened to the scale of galaxies. He should have felt fear, but instead he felt a fire rising inside, a stubborn defiance that perhaps all humans carried. He looked at her and said quietly, Then let them come. The hunters arrive. The days that followed passed in a haze of uneasy silence. Daniel tried to convince himself that maybe the alien girl's words had been exaggerated, born out of fear and pain. Yet the way her eyes lingered on the tree line each night told him she was not imagining the danger. She spent hours sitting outside the cabin, her massive form still weak, but slowly regaining strength, as if the air of Earth itself was feeding her. She listened to the wind and the movements in the forest like a soldier waiting for battle, and Daniel began to share her unease. Every crack of branches, every flutter of wings made his skin crawl, as though unseen eyes were already upon them. One evening, as the last light of the sun bled across the horizon, the forest grew too quiet. Even the crickets ceased their song. Daniel felt it in his chest. First, a deep vibration, more felt than heard. The alien girl stood suddenly, her head snapping toward the trees. Her eyes glowed faintly, and her voice, low and sharp, confirmed what he already feared. They are here. Daniel rushed inside, grabbing the old hunting rifle that had belonged to his father, though he knew it was almost nothing against whatever technology could create glowing chains of energy. His heart pounded as he loaded the single rounds, his hands trembling. The alien girl stepped back into the cabin, crouching low, her massive form filling the space. Yet somehow she seemed ready to move with speed despite her size. Her voice was steady, though it carried a hint of sorrow. "You should leave, small warrior. They are not after you. They want me." Daniel shook his head, refusing. "If I walk away now, they will take you, and whatever they plan next will fall on my world too. You said they fear humans, then let them see why." The ground outside shook with a deep hum, and lights flashed through the trees, pale beams of blue and green cutting through the darkness. Machines emerged, tall, angular shapes that glided across the ground without wheels. Their surfaces shimmered as if half invisible, bending the light around them. Strange glyphs burned along their sides, and weapons protruded from their frames with quiet menace. Figures stepped out from behind them, tall armored beings with helmets that glowed faintly at the eyes. Their movements were smooth and precise, hunters that had done this countless times before. One of them raised a device that projected a circle of light over the cabin walls. The alien girl flinched as if the light itself burned her. She whispered in a voice Daniel barely caught, "Slave mark beacon." Her eyes hardened. "They mean to reclaim me." Daniel felt the fire in his chest grow. He stepped forward, the rifle clutched in his hands, though he knew it was nothing compared to what they carried. He called out, his voice echoing in the clearing. "This place is mine. You will not take her." The hunters did not answer. Instead, one raised a weapon that hummed with deadly power. The alien girl lunged forward before Daniel could react, her massive hand shoving him aside as a beam of searing light struck the doorway, splintering wood into burning fragments. The cabin shook, but held. The alien girl's voice rang out, with fury shaking the air. "I will not be chained again." She moved with strength that seemed impossible for her weakened state, crashing into the first machine and tearing its weapon arm away. Sparks erupted as metal shrieked. Daniel raised his rifle and fired at one of the armored figures. The shot struck true, knocking the figure back, though the armor absorbed most of the impact. Still, it was enough to make the hunter stumble and pause. Daniel reloaded quickly, the sound of the bolt echoing like defiance in the night. The clearing erupted into chaos, beams of light slicing through the air, the roar of wood splintering and metal twisting. The alien girl fought with raw strength, grabbing one of the hunters and hurling him into the side of a machine that collapsed under the force. Daniel kept firing, each shot fueled by stubborn rage rather than hope. And to his astonishment, the hunters hesitated, as though unprepared for resistance from a single human, and a weakened captive smoke filled the air and the ground trembled under the clash. The alien girl's voice cut through it all, fierce and wild. "Do you see now, Daniel? This is why they fear your kind. You fight when reason says flee. You rise when others kneel." The hunters regrouped, their voices sharp in a language Daniel could not understand. They seemed shaken but not defeated. Their machines pulled back slightly, forming a line as if preparing for another strike. Daniel's chest heaved with exhaustion, his rifle nearly empty, yet he stood his ground beside her. The alien girl turned her glowing eyes on him, her expression both proud and grim. "They will not stop tonight or tomorrow, but you have shown them already that Earth is not silent." And in that moment, Daniel understood that the cabin he bought for 12 cents had become the first battlefield in a war he had never asked for. Humanity's fierce answer. The clearing smoldered with broken machines and scorched wood. The night air carried the bitter smell of smoke and burned earth. Daniel stood with his rifle heavy in his hands, his shoulders shaking from exhaustion. The alien girl towered beside him, her chest heaving, her body bruised but unbroken. Her glowing eyes burned like fire as she watched the hunters regroup at the edge of the forest. They were cautious now, moving slower, whispering in their strange tongue as though weighing whether to strike again or retreat. Daniel spat to the side, his face streaked with sweat and ash. He had never felt more alive yet, never so close to death. He looked at them and felt something shift deep inside, a strange pride rising from his bones. It was not pride in himself, but in what it meant to be human. He was small compared to them, His weapon crewed his body, fragile, but he had stood and fought, and in that moment, he understood why legends of humanity had reached the stars. The alien girl straightened to her full height despite the pain etched in her muscles. Her voice rolled through, the clearing sharp and fierce. You thought me broken, you thought me slave, but I am Korath, and this man is human. Together, we will not kneel. The hunters hesitated, their glowing eyes flickering as if uncertain. The lead figure stepped forward, raising a hand that pulsed with energy, but Daniel raised his rifle again even though only one bullet remained. His voice cracked, yet carried across the clearing. Step 1 inch closer and I swear I will fight until I fall. You want her, you will. Have to come through me. For a long moment, silence held them all. The machines hummed, the forest groaned, the smoke curled upward. Then one by one the hunters began to pull back. The machines shifted their weight, turning slowly until their lights faded into the dark trees. Daniel kept his rifle raised until the last glow vanished from sight. Only then did his knees weaken, and he collapsed against the wall of the cabin, breathing hard. The alien girl lowered herself beside him, her massive hand resting on the ground close to his arm, not touching, but near enough that he felt the weight of her presence. They will return, she said, her voice heavy with certainty. They will bring more. They will not forgive what you did tonight. Daniel nodded, too tired to argue. His body ached, his hands blistered, yet in his chest the fire still burned. Then we will be ready, he said quietly. If they want a fight, they will find one here. She turned her eyes toward him, studying his face, with something close to wonder. You do not understand what you have shown them, she said softly. They believe humans are dangerous, not because of your weapons or your numbers, but because of this fire inside you. You do not surrender, you do not bow. Even broken, you rise again. That is why they fear you. That is why they whisper your name across the stars. Daniel swallowed hard, her words sinking deep into him. He had never thought of himself as anything more than a man drifting through life, invisible in a forgotten town. Yet tonight he had stood against beings with power beyond comprehension and forced them to retreat. He looked at her and said with quiet conviction, "Then let them remember what humans are, the alien girls." Lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but something close. Her body leaned back against the ruined wall, her eyes never leaving the forest, as though expecting shadows to emerge again at any moment. Daniel sat beside her the last of the night, stretching, out heavy with tension but laced now with something else. A bond had formed in fire and battle, one that neither chains nor hunters could easily break. As the stars wheeled overhead, the cabin that had once been nothing more than a forgotten prize had become a fortress and a symbol. The hunters had come expecting easy victory. They had left with fear in their hearts. And Daniel, though only one man, knew now that he carried the weight of something larger than himself. The answer of humanity had been given, and it was fierce. A bond forged in fire. The dawn came slowly that morning, spilling pale light across the forest and casting long shadows through the broken walls of the cabin. Daniel sat on the steps with his rifle resting against his knee, his body bruised and aching, but his mind sharper than it had ever been. Beside him, the alien girl stood tall, her figure scarred and weary, yet unbroken. Her violet eyes glowed faintly in the sunlight as she scanned the tree line for movement. But the hunters were gone, at least. For now the forest was still, though in that stillness Daniel felt no peace, only the quiet before the storm. She lowered herself to the ground, her weight making the wood groan. Her gaze turned toward Daniel, and for a long moment she did not speak. Then finally her deep voice came steady and low. "You fought with me, small warrior. You chose to stand when you could have fled. That choice has bound us." Daniel turned to her, and though exhaustion pressed down on him, he met her eyes without flinching. "I could not let them take you," he said simply. "If I had walked away, you would be gone, and Earth would remain a secret only until they chose to break it open. I will not let that happen." Her lips curved faintly again, not in amusement, but in something closer to pride. "In my people's tongue there is a word for one who saves another and binds their paths together. We call it Kareth. You are now my Kareth Daniel, whether you wished it or not." He swallowed, unsure what to say to such a declaration, but deep down he felt the truth of her words. He had freed her. He had fought beside her, and now their futures were entwined. He looked out at the forest and spoke quietly. "Then I guess neither of us is alone anymore." For hours they worked to rebuild what they could of the cabin, patching the walls and clearing the wreckage left by the battle. She moved with strength that was returning little by little. Though her body still carried the marks of chains, Daniel moved. Beside her, his smaller form almost insignificant next to her towering height. Yet together their labor felt steady and sure. By the time the sun climbed high, the cabin no longer looked like a ruin, but like a stronghold holding secrets within its wooden walls. As they rested, Daniel asked the question that had burned in his mind since the night began. What will happen now when they return? And they will what then? The alien girl's gaze hardened, but her voice carried no fear. They will send more hunters. They will try to erase the shame of their retreat, but word will spread through the stars that a human stood against them. That truth alone will change the way they see your people. Daniel frowned. You mean they will come harder? They will come in force, yes, she answered. But they will come with hesitation now, with caution. They will remember you are not prey, but something far more dangerous. She leaned closer, her massive form casting him in shadow. That is why they whisper of humans even in places where no one dares speak the name of Deathworlders. Daniel sat in silence, the weight of her words heavy on his shoulders. He had not asked for any of this yet. Deep inside, he knew he could not turn back. His world was no longer the small forgotten town or the broken truck or the lonely silence of empty nights. His world had expanded to the scale of stars and chains and battles yet to come. As the evening settled, the alien girl placed her hand near him, the size of her palm, almost enough to cover his chest. You bought a cabin for 12 cents, Daniel, she said softly. But what you truly bought was a place in a war older and greater than you know. And now I will not leave your side. I am your Kareth and you are my warrior. Daniel felt his throat tighten at her words. He nodded slowly, knowing they were not just promises but vows forged in fire and blood. He looked at her massive form, at the scars that marked her, at the strength that pulsed through her despite all she had suffered, and he realized that whatever came next, he was ready. The forest lay quiet again, but in that silence, Daniel heard the echo of battles to come. He stood and lifted his rifle, though its chamber was empty, and looked out across the trees with defiance in his heart. The cabin was no longer a forgotten place. It was the first stand of a bond that would shake more than one world, and as the stars appeared overhead, the human and the alien girl sat side by side, not captor and captive, not stranger and wanderer, but allies joined by fate and by choice. The war had not ended, but something far stronger had begun, and in that beginning both of them knew the galaxy would never be the same. The bond that changed everything. The cabin stood quiet as night embraced the forest and smoke from the battle drifted away into the sky. Daniel sat on the wooden step, his face marked with ash and sweat, while the alien girl rested beside him, her giant frame leaning against the cabin wall. Her breathing was steady now, her strength slowly returning after the chains had stolen so much from her. Around them, the world looked calm, but Daniel felt the truth like a weight in his chest. Calm was only an illusion. She turned her glowing violet eyes toward him, and in her voice there was a gravity that made the air itself feel heavier. You chose to stand, she said softly. You had nothing, and yet you fought. You are no longer just a man who bought an old cabin. You are something more. You are my Kareth, my chosen. He met her gaze, and for the first time did not feel small in her presence. He felt equal, bound to her, not by accident, but by a fate. Neither of them could deny. Daniel looked at the trees, at the deep dark beyond, and he understood that hunters would return, and that others stronger than hunters would follow. He knew Earth would not remain hidden, and that the cabin he bought for 12 cents had already become the spark of something larger. He thought of the galaxy she had spoken of, filled with empires and chains and whispers of humanity's name spoken in fear and in awe. His voice was quiet, but steady. "Let them come," he said. "If they seek us, they will learn what it means when humans rise." The alien girl's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of joy but of recognition. She placed her massive hand close to him, not touching but near enough to feel the warmth of her strength. "Together," she said, and her voice carried both promise and warning. "Together we will face them. Daniel, together we will remind the stars why they should never have forgotten Earth." The forest remained silent as though listening. The stars above burned cold and endless, but in that silence and in that light a bond had been forged, a bond that no chains could break. Daniel no longer felt like a forgotten man, and she no longer felt like a broken captive. They were allies, warriors bound by fire and choice, and their story had only just begun. The end.